Harvard Divinity School.
Uses and abuses of power in alternative spiritualities. Implications for spiritual care of patients and communities. April 29th, 2023.
Thank you. I'm Johannes Zinzendorf, and I'm going to be following up actually on what the previous speaker talked about. First of all, though, I want to say how grateful I am to be returning to this year's conference. I want to thank Dan, Owen, and others on the organizing committee for this opportunity to talk to you today about power and the spirit at the Hermitage, the Harmonist community where I live in central Pennsylvania. Our bottom line is that the earth is incarnated spirit, that we come from the spirit, we're created from the spirit, we are sustained by the spirit, and at the end of our apparently individual lives, we return to the spirit to be taken apart and reused, recycled countless of times as part of the constantly unfolding blossoming of the spirit. There is a line in Judeo-Christian thought that this is the day the Lord has made. Our take is slightly different. This is the day the spirit is making. Note the present tense and the active gerund form of the verb, where the spirit is always both being and becoming. There is an underlying wholeness and unity to existence. However, our birds here at the Hermitage are having no part of that. Yesterday, as I was putting out lettuce for our chickens, one hen grabbed a big chunk of lettuce and ran off with it, and I could just hear her thinking, mine, all mine. And then there was the goose, who stood in a veritable sea of cracked corn and also was thinking, mine, all mine, so that when another goose approached to have some corn for himself, the first one just reacted emotionally and violently, lowered its head, stuck out its long neck, and honking and hissing, chased the offending goose around the barnyard. Meanwhile, from the background came the smarter geese who approached and ate their fill. But this is just not for birds, this idea of mine, all mine. Just last week, as I was going down to Harrisburg, I had to get on the freeway, and I was going on the on-ramp, and in my old and slowly driven van, and I noticed behind me a vehicle was just edging, could not wait to get around me. And so I kept looking, and sure enough, here it comes around me. Well, I reacted like the goose. This emotional anger just overwhelmed me, and I kept thinking, mine, all mine. So I swerved out in front of this vehicle. It was dangerous and it was stupid, and I immediately felt regret. And I spent the rest of the day when I was driving around compensating for that initial overreaction. I was courteous, I was kind, I let drivers on and off. We were sharing the freeway, and believe me, there was a lot of freeway to share. We were not running out of freeway, just as the hen was not going to run out of lettuce, nor was the goose going to run out of corn. All three of us were trapped in an Aristotelian universe where A is A and B is B and C is C, and this inherent unity and underlying wholeness is sliced and diced, and we, you and I, are part of that slicing and dicing. We are bits and pieces of that. I call this the illusion of the egg. And think of a nest of eggs. And inside each shell is a developing chicken. And with the opaqueness of the shell and being cramped inside the shell, each developing chick thinks that it is everything, that this entire world is contained inside the shell. But if you stand back and look at all these eggs in this nest. Every bird and every shell is thinking the same thing, mine, all mine. And yet I do think that there is a good reason for this idea of the self as separate. It empowers us. It activates us. We realize that we are organisms that need to survive, that we need water and food and shelter. And we realize that we can provide these things for ourselves. But if you take this to an extreme, then we develop a pecking order and hierarchies of power. And we live in hierarchies of power. We are surrounded by pyramids of power. There are pyramids of politics and business and finance, social media influencers. And at the top of every pyramid is at least one person. Traditionally, it's been a white straight guy. And yet they are on top of this vast pyramid of people. And it seems like the power is sort of sucked up to the top. And yet I'm not suggesting that the people on top are there unethically. Somehow it wasn't just an idea of what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. No, we give politicians our vote. We give Amazon our money. All these things are transactional and we expect things in return. The question is, how do we break out of this idea of what's mine is mine and ourselves as individuals, separate from this underlying unity and wholeness? And I think the idea is we have to break through the shell. We have to peck our way out and experience what is really outside the shell. And as you look around the nest and you see your brothers and sisters, you realize that we're sort of all in this together. This changes our perspective. It gives us a new context to look at the world and to understand it. Now, say you're a penguin and you're swimming in the ocean and you come across an iceberg and the iceberg is sticking up out of the water and you say, oh, that iceberg is me. I'm that tip. But let's take a deep dive. Let's go under the water. And you see this vast mass under the water and you go, oh my word. And you realize that this vast mass is you, that you are part of this because the little bit on top above the water is connected to the big part below the water. And it's a unity, it's a wholeness. Now that is our new context, our new perspective. And I want to apply that to, first of all, the apparent individual, to myself connected to the spirit, to each person connected to the spirit. How do we know? How do we find out what this connection is all about? The way I do it is by listening, and it takes active listening, it takes intentional listening. And this type of listening is a skill, and it's difficult because it requires concentration. But to open ourselves up to the spirit and have it speak through us, to find out, to ask the question, how can I serve? How can I help? How can I nurture the spirit? All this requires listening and waiting for an answer. Now, if we move up a step in increasing social complexity to a significant other or others, I have been accused of being not really dogmatic, but of being, let me see, of wanting my own way, okay? And of getting my own way. And why? Because in a relationship, it's easy, isn't it? Say, let's just do what I want, or not even ask. Let's just do what I want. And that's the me, this is mine, right? All mine coming out. But when you're dealing with one other person or a couple of other people, you need to find out what they're thinking. And so you ask the question, what do you think? That's all it takes. What do you think? Because you come to the limit of your own understanding. I know what I think, but what do you think? And at that point, then you share power. At that point, then you start to develop a consensus. You collaborate. And then if we move up another step of increasing social complexity to an intentional community, for example, where you're living with 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 other people, you still can ask directly in person, what do you think? And at that point, then you can start to share and develop consensus. And if someone says, well, the Spirit speaks through me, so you do what I say, then you can rightly come back and say, well, the Spirit speaks through me. And another person says, well, the Spirit speaks through me. And pretty soon we're sitting in Quaker meeting. The question, though, when you come to the level of a village or a town, you realize that using the New England town meetings as a really good example of developing consensus among a group of maybe even several hundred people is still possible. But when you take it up to the level of a city or a county or a state or a nation, it becomes seemingly impossible to do anything more than a representative democracy, but maybe not. I'm thinking there are ways using modern technology where we can have more of a more direct participation in how a democracy works. So we're actually squeezing down the pyramid, squishing the hierarchy, perhaps using social media. I mean, I have no idea. That's really far beyond my pay scale. But I do think that we can ask the questions, and I think over time, develop some kind of new consensus that probably doesn't even exist yet. The question is, how do we apply this equality to something like a business? And I'm thinking of the differential in a corporation between the lowest paid and the highest paid, all the vast number at the bottom, and the one person at the top. I understand in Japan, it's common to seek a differential of the power of 10 between the lowest paid and the highest paid. That seems to be a fair distribution of power and money. Whereas in our country, it might be 100 times or more. And the question again is, how do we get more equality in a corporate structure? And again, we were going to lower the hierarchy, squeeze the hierarchy down, push the pyramid down. All the time, we're seeking a new context, a new perspective. And I find in my daily life, in my interactions with people, with fellow incarnations of the Spirit, that there are 4 behaviors that are really important for me to keep in mind: kindness, patience, humility, respect. In fact, that's one of our hymns. That's our complete hymn, just repeated over and over and over. Kindness, patience, humility, respect. If I keep those in mind as I'm dealing with other people and other creatures around me, I find that 95% of the time, I can act in harmony with the Spirit. But that 5%, that's difficult. And it's not pretty. With me, it's not pretty. There are 5% when I simply do the freeway thing again, overwhelmed by emotion, act blindly, throw a tantrum. I said it's not pretty. And yet, recognizing that there is going to be 5% when I'm just going to mess up, there are 2 ways of handling it. I can stay in a loop of self-recrimination and self-blame. And really, it's hard to break out of a loop like that. What I found is that forgiveness is really important to realize that, as Nietzsche said, I am human, all too human. Feet of clay, head in the clouds. You know what this is like. I think many of us are in the same boat. We have high ideals, and yet our human basic nature comes out. And that's fine. It's going to happen. And the neat thing is that we don't have to be 100% perfect all the time for the spirit to unfold. The spirit has a long, long arc, far beyond our individual lifetimes. We're going to be sliced and diced and reused countless times as the spirit unfolds and works its way towards harmony and unity. So the 5%, that's good. If that's the best we can do, we're really doing pretty well. And so forgiveness is so important, because when we're working with the idea of power and with the spirit and how the spirit is going to unfold, I like to envision it as a flower. In fact, I'm going to show my button here. This is our emblem of a blooming flower. We look at the earth, the planet, as a flower. And flowers need to be nurtured. They need to be cared for. A plant will grow wherever it finds itself, wherever the seed is planted. If it's planted among rot, it will attempt to grow. But it will be stunted and slightly deformed and will not reach its full potential. On the other hand, if it finds itself in loamy soil where there is plenty of water and nutrients and sunlight, it will grow into a really beautiful plant and will come very close to its full potential. And I see ourselves as humans being part of that. I see ourselves as being both the conscience and the consciousness of the planet, of the spirit. Consciousness means the awareness, the content, the big contest, the big picture of ourselves as being part of the spirit. And the conscience as being the ethical drive, the pointing the direction in which we can go to make the world a garden, to nurture not just humanity, but all the creatures that are on the planet. A lofty goal, I understand, but we have the power to do that. We have the power from the spirit to become a really beautiful garden. And in the words of one of my favorite Star Trek characters, we have the power to make it so. You and I are brought into being, we are one. So to bring vision and healing, we are one. The world sees itself through us, transforming in harmony. We are one. We are one. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, President and Fellows of Harvard College.